Hi everyone, nice to be with you again. My name is Joseph and welcome to Bean to Bar World. Today I'm going to have a sort of a chocolate tasting 101 with you. We're going to go over the main points of just how to conduct a proper chocolate tasting, whether it's by yourself, with some friends, maybe it's in a professional setting with a big group of people. Either way, you're going to learn some tips and information on how to conduct a chocolate tasting in order to get the most out of your fine chocolates. So let's get started. So the first thing we want to cover is why do a chocolate tasting? Why have one in the first place? Can we just eat our chocolate bar as we do? Well, we're specifically talking about fine chocolate, which is very different than, say, commercial chocolate, which is what most people are used to. So you can't really do a tasting with commercial chocolate. I mean, you can, but the differences are very slight, and there's a lot of interference there with the other flavors added. When we're dealing with fine chocolate, it's similar to fine coffees, fine wines. We're tasting the quality of the ingredient, and in this case, cocoa beans. So there's a big difference between this chocolate and fine chocolate. Fine chocolate has much more interesting flavors beyond just cocoa. And a lot of beginners who try fine chocolate, who join my tastings, are surprised with how interesting chocolate tastes like. These are more authentically chocolate than this because there's no other flavors added, but they're way more flavorful and interesting than this. What I focus on here is the quality of the chocolate. A lot of people like to guilt people into fine chocolate, saying this is fair trade, this is organic, blah, blah, blah. You know, you should feel bad for eating this, you should eat this instead. There's good points in that, you know, there's definitely reasons why we want our foods to be more fairly traded, which all of these are without the certification and for good reason. But there's more to it than that. It's about the flavor. You can have fair trade, organic, whatever, commercial chocolate that's still made with the same mediocre cacao that's used to make these chocolate bars. Again, when I say mediocre, it sounds like I'm talking down about them, but it's basically a very narrow genetic spectrum of cacao that is used to make most of the chocolate in the world. And the thing is that there's many varieties of cacao, and most people don't know that because they've never tried them before. These fine chocolates are made from different genetic varieties of cacao. And this chocolate has a very predictable flavor, right? Nothing too offensive either way. A lot of people like it. That's why it tastes this way. You know, a lot of companies over the years have grown and basically dictate to us what the product should taste like. But really, again, those are not authentically chocolate. This is. The flavors here come strictly from the bean itself, how it was cured and how it was turned into chocolate. And so the purpose of a chocolate tasting, specifically fine chocolate, is to articulate those flavors, to find them, to appreciate them, and to appreciate the skill involved. And so this is why we focus on dark chocolate. So a lot of people ask, why do tastings focus on dark chocolate a lot? Well, because we want to taste the quality of the bean without any interference from milk, sugar, other ingredients. You know, I have some bars behind me that have flavors added, ingredients added. That's okay. If it's a real ingredient, that's fine. But in order to appreciate two things, the quality of the bean and the skill set of the maker, we have to go for the dark chocolate first. And a lot of people don't like dark chocolate, and I understand why. A lot of people associate dark chocolate with pain. They associate it with bitterness. That is not dark chocolate. That's not the flavor of dark chocolate. That's what you're used to. That's commercial chocolate, dark chocolate. It doesn't have to taste that way. Really good quality dark chocolate is not bitter. For some people, because of your sugar tolerance, you might find it more intense. You know, 70% might be more intense to someone who eats sugar in their foods a lot, in their coffee, as opposed to someone who doesn't. But it's not bitter in the sense of grapefruit bitter, bitter melon, bitter IPA, that sort of thing. A lot of people confuse intensity and bitterness. So dark chocolate doesn't have to be bitter. Dark chocolate can be very flavorful. These 70% bars taste much sweeter, even though they have the same amount of sugar, as a lot of commercial 70% bars. And the reason for that is the constituents of the bean itself, the level of tannins, for instance, and that sort of thing. So that's why we focus on dark chocolate in a tasting. We want to taste the quality of the bean without any interference. Similar to how people would have a black coffee tasting or espresso tasting, right? Without the milk and the sugar. You want to taste the quality of that bean, of the coffee. And same as wine. You don't want to go to a fine wine tasting or have fine wine and then they tell you that they added some cranberry juice to make it taste better. Or let's say you went to an espresso tasting and they said, yeah, we put some vanilla shots in there to make it taste better. Well, if you did that, then it's probably not a fine quality coffee bean. And if it was, then you probably just ruined it with that vanilla shot. But again, there's nothing wrong with having real vanilla in chocolate, but it's pretty much always there because it makes the chocolate taste better. And if it's a really good quality bean and the maker knows how to make the chocolate properly, you know, it doesn't need any help from anything else. It can stand alone, and that's what these chocolate bars do. The only ingredients are cocoa bean and sugar, and that's it. There might be an extra cocoa butter in there, which is just a little bit of fat from the bean, but there's nothing else added. We're going to taste some really interesting flavors in here. Well, I'm going to taste them. You're going to watch me taste them. And nothing was added. It's just cocoa bean and sugar. These chocolate bars, the Lindt has vanilla bean. The Cadbury bar has natural flavors, which is not natural at all. And again, nothing per se wrong with vanilla. Might not even be wrong with natural flavors, but they're there to help improve the flavor. And they still taste very basic. And again, if you like that basic flavor, that's fine. These have nothing added, and the flavors are just so much more profound, unique, interesting. Sort of like craft beer, right? There's sort of been a craft beer movement in the past couple decades, and you see them a lot in many cities, these craft breweries popping up, and they're creating beer that tastes very different than commercial beer that most people are used to. And a lot of people don't like that craft beer, even if it tastes better, even if it's made better quality. They don't like it because it veers away from what their expectations are of beer. And so the first thing you kind of need to do if you're enjoying fine foods and fine chocolate especially is to sort of break that conception of you know what chocolate tastes like. This is not what chocolate tastes like. This is one way chocolate can taste, but there's many, many types of flavors of chocolate. Just like there's many types of apples. There's many types of tomatoes. If you are a gardener or in agriculture, you know that there's more than just this monoculture of produce that we see in the grocery stores. There's so many different wild varieties, cultivars, subvarieties of different fruits and vegetables and greens and all these sorts of things. And they all have their unique properties, whether it's appearance, but also flavor, taste, and that sort of thing. So that's why we do a dark chocolate tasting. That's what we're sort of trying to appreciate for those who want to appreciate it. So how to prepare for a chocolate tasting? I'm not going to get too involved, but I'm not going to keep it too simple. A tasting can be, very elaborate. If you're having a professional tasting or a group tasting, you want to really go all out. You have a big lineup of bars and you set up the tables nice and you have flowers on the table just to create an experience. But it can also be simply you at your desk for a few minutes in the middle of the day, taking out your beautiful Lacuna bar, taking a few bites and just appreciating that flavor. And that's good, right? That's how chocolate should be enjoyed, fine chocolate especially. We've been conditioned to think that this is a serving. So when I want chocolate, I grab my bar, chomp it down within a few minutes, and I'm done with it, and that was good. Well, you might enjoy that, but you certainly shouldn't do that with fine chocolate because you're going to miss out on a lot of flavor if you do that. And they're also very expensive, so unless you have a lot of money, you probably don't want to eat one of these in one sitting. One chocolate bar can cost you $10 to $12 to $14 a bar. And so there's a lot more flavor per bite. You don't have to have so much. And so a really good tasting only requires maybe a few pieces of a few bars, and that should be good enough. Sort of like having a little glass of scotch or one glass of really good expensive wine or one shot of really beautiful, well-made espresso in the morning or in the middle of the day. That's sort of what it's about. So I'm going to go over how to prepare yourself for a tasting. And you might think, well, how do I prepare myself? Do I have to wear nice clothing? Not necessarily, but you need to be aware of a few things. So the first thing is you have to be hungry. You have to be hungry. There's no question about it. If you're full, if you're doing a tasting after a big meal or right after a meal, you're not going to appreciate the chocolates to the same extent. So if you're spending money on these chocolates, If you're a professional and you're conducting a tasting, make sure your guests know to come hungry. A lot of people won't. They don't read the instructions. It happens to me all the time. I see them eating on the Zoom session before it starts. They're getting all these different flavors in their mouth. They're filling up their tummy. Not a good thing. If you want to really appreciate it, if you're someone who has trouble articulating the flavors in fine foods, you're one of those people who says, I'm not good at it, which everyone is, then you really want to be hungry. When our stomach is full, it sends signals to our brain, and it basically starts to shut down how much flavor we get from our food. And you notice this if you ever ate too much at a wedding or a Christmas or something like that. The flavors start to become muted. You start to eat things, and you can taste the saltiness, the sweetness, but the satisfaction and the flavor sort of disappears because it's basically our brain telling us, hey, stop eating. You've eaten enough. I don't want you to even enjoy it anymore. And so if you're too full, you're just not going to get the same flavor out of your food. So be hungry. Have it between meals. Have it in the morning. Have it before. If you're having guests over, do the chocolate tasting first before the meal. I know that's unorthodox, but it will really allow you and everyone to get the most out of the tasting. Also, be warm. Don't be cold. The chocolate should be warm, but you should be warm as well. Sorry, not warm, but room temperature. If you're cold, if your fingers are cold, the room is cold, your nose is cold, your mouth is cold, it's going to mute the flavors a little bit. It's not going to allow you to get the most out of your chocolate. So one thing you can do is have some hot water for your guests or for yourself. If you're feeling a bit cold, just drink some hot water. A few sips, really breathe so that warm water and warm air will warm up your nasal pharynx, your mouth. Because if it's cold, if your mouth is cold, your nose is cold, the chocolate won't melt as well. It'll limit the experience and the flavors won't release as well if it's cold. Okay, so you don't want to be cold, your mouth doesn't want to be cold. If you don't like the idea of drinking plain hot water, you can have, for instance, white tea. A white tea, some people say it just tastes like water anyway, but it doesn't. That's another thing that you can have to sort of warm yourself up that doesn't have too much of a strong flavor. So warm yourself up. Be aware of smells on you and in the room. Okay, if it's a room that has a lot of strong odors for some reason, you're cooking something in the kitchen, lotions, lip balms, shampoos, perfumes, colognes, maybe somebody just smoked and you have that smell still on you. These things will impede flavor in general. So if you're doing a fine chocolate tasting, make sure you're aware of those. Tell your guests not to come with heavy perfumes and then lotions on their hands, because then when they go to touch it and put it towards their mouth, they're going to smell the lotions. That's going to interfere. Again, we don't live in a vacuum. If you have perfumes and whatnot, that's not the end of the world. Just know that it might interfere a little bit with what you're tasting, the fine chocolate. So again, how to prepare yourself: be hungry, don't be cold, and try to not have any strong odors on your person. Now, how to set up a tasting. It can be, again, as elaborate or simple as you want. You want to have your room temperature chocolates, again, not cold, or the flavors will be a bit more muted. So room temperature chocolate, I have 3 bars here, my Cacao Suya Lacuna bar, made with Amazonia Peru cacao, and then Hiende de Envere and Cantu bar, the Moropan bar, made with Piura region cacao. So the Piura region in Peru is closer to the coast, and then this region here, the Amazonia, is a bit more east of there, a bit more inland. But even though these are in the same origin, the Piura origin, they're from different parts. So the Hiende de Envere Peru cacao comes from somewhere I believe it's a bit more east of Piura city, whereas the Moropan is a bit more northeast. So different regions within a region. A lot of people think that, a Peru origin or Ecuador origin, they oversimplify what the flavors are going to be. And although there's some consistency sometimes, I would say a lot of Peru origins, not all, but a lot, produce cacao and chocolate that have fruity notes, they'll still be different. So this is a region, and then within this region, there's 2 other regions as well. And what that means too is also different farming techniques, different curing perhaps. There's different preconditioning that they can do to the cacao, which might shift from region to region, and different genetics. That's the most important that a lot of people look over. Even if it's the same variety of cacao, of wild cacao, in different regions, over time, those will change, those will develop. Different populations that originally came from the same place, as they divert, they take on different qualities, and those can be flavor qualities as well. So I have 3 Peru, these are all Peru origin, but they're going to taste very different chocolate bars. I have the Hinder en Vere, which is a chocolate maker in Netherlands, Contu's in Montreal, Cacao Suyo is based in Peru. And they all have very different flavors. So I have my room temperature chocolate. I have a few pieces out here for me. I mean, this is good enough. 3 simple pieces. It's maybe, I don't know, 5 grams a piece. That's good for a tasting. You know, chocolate is very decadent. You know, you don't need to have a lot of it. It's not like tea where you can just constantly guzzle it down. And obviously, if it's fine tea, you're not guzzling it down, but you can have a lot. Whereas chocolate, it's very heavy. You know, it's a fat-based product. You don't want too much. So a few pieces there. Hot water. Hot water is good not just for warming yourself up, but that's the best palate cleanser you can have. If you're having carbonated water, lukewarm water, cold water, that's going to cool your palate, and it's not going to allow the chocolate to melt properly. It's not going to release the aromas properly. If you're having palate cleansers such as oatmeal, polenta, apple, crackers, that's all going to have interference. Even if it's very bland, it will have some interference. Hot water is the best. Again, this might be a bit too much for some people, but if it's filtered, then it will have less flavor. Some people's tap waters just have a strong flavor to them, and if it's filtered, it'll be less likely to impact the flavor of the chocolates. But again, you don't have to go that far. And then your tools. So here I have the Bean to Bar World flavor wheel. You can download a free one off the website, or you can buy this one here, which comes with a beautiful keepsake poem on the back. And then also the Bean to Bar compass, which I designed many years ago, which is not just a tasting notebook, it's a workbook. It has a flavor wheel, it has tips on breathing techniques, mouth movements, things we're going to go over today. And it has a lot of helpful guides in the notebook, because if you're a beginner, you don't really know how to express the smells, the taste, the textures, things like that, and that'll help you. And if you really want to take your chocolate tasting seriously, it's really good to record as you go along. Not every time you're eating, but start to record the flavors of the different bars that you're trying and go back to them, refer to them, and that will really help solidify a lot of these things in your brain, because flavor is a perception built in the brain. So the more you record it and pay attention to it, the more you'll be aware and the more wise you will become when it comes to chocolate. So we talked about how to prepare for a chocolate tasting, how to set it up. Now we're going to conduct the chocolate tasting, and you're going to sit there and watch me eat chocolate. Hopefully it's not too frustrating for you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through important steps, but I'm not going to delve into them too deeply, but I'm going to touch on them, okay? So there's essentially 5 steps to tastings, and some of mine will reflect what a lot of people say, and the last 2 especially will be very different from what you hear other places. But it's very important. There's a lot of bad information when it comes to tasting out there, even from so-called sommeliers, and even chocolate makers themselves don't always give the best instruction when it comes to chocolate tasting. So in my compass, you'll see that I have an acronym, Chocolate Has Me, which stands for Hear, Admire, Sniff, and then masticate and move and exhale. Hear, admire, sniff, masticate and move and exhale. Chocolate has me. And the reason why I use that acronym is it's easy to remember, and it points to the most important aspects, especially the last 2 of masticate and move and exhale, okay? So I have 3 chocolates here, my Lacuna bar from Cacao Suyo, my Hinder en Vere Pure Origin bar, and my Maurepas Origin bar from Contu. Now I'm going to go through them one by one. I'm going to explain a little bit as I go. And so the 5 steps are here, which means you're going to snap your chocolate, whether it's off the bar or off your piece, and you're going to listen for the snap. And it's not super important, but it basically tells you if the chocolate's been tempered or not. But also the temperature of the chocolate will change the snap. If it's cold, it'll snap more than if it's a bit warmer. And the thickness will also affect the sound of the snap. It's not too important, but something definitely to be aware of. The more you know your product, the better. Admire. So you're not going to just admire it per se, but you're going to analyze how it looks. The color of the chocolate. Is it a nice homogeneous brown color? Or is there streaks? Is there mottling? Is there white stuff in there? That'll tell you too if it's a really good temper or not. If it's not in temper properly, It'll usually have what we call fat bloom, or just looks a bit more mottled and hazy and white. Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad to eat. If it's not in temper, you can still eat the chocolate. The texture is not as nice, the melt might not be as nice, and although untempered chocolate doesn't change the actual makeup of the aromas or the tastings in the chocolate, it does affect how we interpret it, and it can sort of change the flavor in that way because of our experience with it. Because flavor is a combination not just of what we smell and taste, but also what we feel, what we hear. All those things come into play. So after that, you're going to sniff the chocolate. And then the most important, which is what most people miss, is you're going to bite it once or twice. Yes, you're going to chew your chocolate, move it around in your mouth, and exhale, exhale, exhale out of your nose, which is what we call retronasal olfaction. So retronasal olfaction is basically exhaling out of your nose while you're eating the food. A lot of people will say to put the chocolate on your tongue, let it sit there, let it melt, savor the flavor. Terrible advice, terrible. If you know anything about flavor, the science of flavor, mouth movement and exhaling, retronasal olfaction, is the most important component of getting the most flavor out of your food. So if you're just letting it sit on your tongue there, you're not going to get the most flavor out of your food. If you're someone who says, I can't taste these things, you're not breathing enough. Okay, so we're going to go through that now. So the first chocolate bar is the Lacuna bar. So I'm going to have some hot water to warm up my mouth, to cleanse my palate. Okay, the fat in the chocolate will be lifted up from the hot water. If you ever washed utensils and floors that had chocolate on them, sometimes you don't even need soap. You just need really hot water to take it off. And since all this fat's going to be in our mouth, we're going to rinse it off with some hot water. So let's go ahead and try the first one. So you don't have to nod like that, like I am, but I think I'm just trying to focus on the flavor. Everyone has their own little thing. And I think you can hear me over the microphone. I'm breathing heavily. So the key is to bite it once or twice. And what that does is it starts to disperse the chocolate in our mouth. Our gastric juices in the mouth start to digest the food, starts to release those aromas. It creates more surface area for the aromas to release. So the reason why people say don't chew it is they don't want you to just chew it and swallow it. But you're adults, you can control your swallowing. So as long as you don't swallow, you can chew it a couple times and sort of disperse that chocolate. And then the next point is to move it around in your mouth with your tongue up and down, melt it. But the most important part is while that's happening, you're going to breathe in nice and strong. And then breathe out through your nose as it's moving around. You can close your eyes to focus, or you can use your flavor tools. Let's say I'm tasting something earthy in there. Look in the earthy section, see if that helps give me some suggestions. Flavor wheels, flavor trees are just suggestion tools. It's not the be all and end all. You know, if you pick up something that's not on there, that's okay. But it's there to help give you suggestions, because we don't usually think of our food in this way, this deeply. Another thing you can do is when you're exhaling, flap your tongue up and down really fast, and that'll really help push those aromas into the nasopharynx, okay? So the flavor of our chocolate is not found in the chocolate, that's the stimuli. Our mouth picks up the taste, the basic sweet, sour, bitter, those sorts of things, but it's our nose that picks up the more distinct flavors, the aromas. But our nose still doesn't know what it is. It gets sent to what's called an olfactory bulb, which gives the bulb sort of a pattern of which molecules are sort of coming to the olfactory receptors. And then the brain takes what you tasted, what you smelled, compares it to previous foods and smells that you had, and creates a flavor image. And that's tied a lot into our long-term memory and emotion. So that's why I tell people, don't worry too much about what the back of the bar says. The descriptions of the flavor notes, the suggested flavor notes, the keyword is suggested there, is that it helps the consumer get an idea of maybe what they're going to taste. We all will conclude on different specifics. So the Lacuna bar here suggests more general flavors. They say floral and fruity. Floral and fruity. They don't say exactly what. It is very, very fragrant. So the smell is very fragrant. much more than the other two. This one, the Hyundai Invicta, is a bit more subtle. Very subtle. And the Maurepas is a little bit in between the two. The flavor definitely has some fruity notes in there. I wouldn't say it's floral like rose or lavender or something like that, jasmine. For me, it's not that floral. But it's very botanically fragrant, right? And, you know, different plants have different parts that are very fragrant. It could be the leaves, it could be the flowers, it could be the rhizomes, it could be different aspects, the bark. So when a lot of people say floral, sometimes what they mean is sort of botanical fragrance, right? And it's not necessarily flower per se. I mean, there's some flowers out there that don't smell like anything. There's some flowers, I don't remember what it's called, but there's a flower out there that smells like rotten meat that attracts the flies in the swamps. I forgot what that's called. I mean, would you say that is floral? Rotten meat, right? So, you know, that's a bit too general as well, floral. But for me, it's very fragrant. Not fragrant like basil or mint, but sort of herbaceous in a way. Some sort of herb. You know, maybe like a really fragrant grass. You know, not sort of chlorophyll grass, but a dried grass. There's also some bake notes. So I get some sort of bake notes at the end, maybe a little bit of spice. A lot of people will also say rum. A lot of people get rum in the Lacuna Bar. And so if you've ever had that before, it has these sort of woody, earthy notes, but very light, like oak. And so with that and the sweetness, it's only a 70%, but there's no bitterness. It's not too sweet, but it's got a sweetness to it. I can see why people say rum. I used to always get a raisin for this. The other day in one of my tastings, somebody said it tasted like Glossettes. Better Glossettes than Glossettes, which was good. But it does have that dried fruit. This batch for me is not as raisiny as before. I would say maybe more dates or fig. So it definitely has those dried fruit notes for me. Has some of those botanical herb, dried grass, a little bit of baked. Is kind of where I'm going with this. And that's all from the bean itself. The ingredients are just cocoa bean and cane sugar. That's it. No other ingredients. You're not going to get any of these interesting flavors in your commercial chocolates. They're just not in there. And if they are going to be in there, they're going to have to add them as flavor enhancers or ingredients. All that flavor comes from that type of cacao from Peru, how it was fermented, how it was roasted, how it was refined. That's what brings out those beautiful flavors. And that's sort of the key of fine chocolate from commercial chocolate, is it goes beyond just cocoa. It has a beautiful array of aromas in there. So let's go ahead and try the Hyundai Invicta bar. Again, the smell is very delicate, very mild. But let's see how it tastes. Sometimes the smells will parallel in a way what you taste. The smell of the Lacuna Bar was very fragrant, and the taste was super fragrant as well. Now this smell of the Hyundai Invicta bar is very, very delicate. Let's see how it tastes. So for me, it went fruity, coffee, toasted pumpernickel, something like that, and then woody at the end. So not as floral and bright or light as the Lacuna Bar, not as fragrant, not as perfumey in a good way, but still has beautiful flavor. It has some stone fruit notes, not too strong. They don't stay too long. Then I get, you know, almost like pumpernickel, like nice grains, bread, but like heavier, warmer type flavors. And then I do get a little bit of woody at the end. So it's not as fragrant and floral as this one, but it does have a little bit. It's a bit more, you have to search for the flavors a little bit more in this one. So this is a bit more subtle. And there are some bars out there that are better for beginners than others. So for instance, the Lacuna Bar and the Cantu Bar are much better for beginners because the flavors really hit you at once. Whereas some are a bit more subtle. The flavors take some time to come out. And if you're not attuned or if you're not good at discerning the flavors, it just might be a bit more work for you. And beginners get frustrated more easily. So if you're conducting a professional tasting, or if you find yourself are sort of a beginner and you find it frustrating to taste the flavors, it could be that some bars are just a bit more subtle, more advanced. It takes a bit more work to find the flavors. So I would suggest maybe something like the Lacuna bar, the Moro Pan, where the flavors sort of hit you. It's really hard to ignore them. They're right there. Whereas the Hacienda Nevera bar is beautiful. It's subtle. It's more, I would say, sort of sophisticated in a way, because it's more quiet, but it has a strong presence to it as well, the flavor notes. Those were these two bars. Let's go ahead and try the Cantu bar, the Moro Pan bar. And you don't always have to cleanse your palate in between. Some people say, how can you say that? You don't have to. This is not a judging. When you're enjoying your chocolates, enjoy them the way you want. If you want to cleanse your palate in between, then do so. If you don't, that's okay, because there's always going to be interference. And we have to learn to articulate what the interference. If you want to get better at tasting, it's probably better to taste with some interference and to see if you could still find those notes consistently in the chocolate. So, but I do want to warm up my mouth a little bit. You know, remember, we're not doing a judging. This is not a judging. This is a tasting. We're enjoying the flavors of our foods. And so you don't have to be so precise about, you know, you're not going to scrub your tongue in between each chocolate bar. But if you feel a bit overwhelmed, then drink some hot water and cleanse that palate. It's amazing too how, you know, these chocolate bars I've had multiple times, many times. And on some days, you know, depending on what you ate that day, it depends on the lineup too. You know, what you had previously, you're comparing it in your brain to what you recently had, and that'll sort of change your interpretation. Today, this tastes like a really delicious bowl of Greek yogurt with raspberries or strawberries on top, like fresh, like raspberry sauce or strawberry sauce with really good yogurt, because it has the tartness, there's a creaminess to it, and it does have strong fruity note. And so the suggested notes on the Moro Pan bar is plum and cherry. So a lot of people get that. A lot of people will say cherry, raspberry, plum, but some people will say apricot. Some people might say citrus because they're surprised with the tartness in the chocolate. And when I say tart, I use that in a positive way. If I say sour, it's usually in a negative way when it comes to chocolate. And this one has a little bit of tartness that really helps accentuate those fruity notes, the cherry and the stone fruit and whatnot. It's not sour. So there are some brands out there, some chocolate bars that are really sour. It's like you ate the chocolate and had a shot of balsamic vinegar and you could feel the sour in your throat even after you've swallowed. That's not good. You know, dark chocolate shouldn't be bitter. It shouldn't be too bitter. It also shouldn't be very sour. And that comes from the fermentation process. It comes from how it was dried and roasted and refined. So if we don't get rid of that acidity, if we don't limit it, it's not really a good quality chocolate. You know, there are some makers out there that stand by it and say, you know, I under roast it on purpose and to bring out the natural flavor. It's not really natural per se. You know, that's the whole point of making chocolate, is to play around with the flavors that come out according to the technique. You know, how you roast it, the temperature, duration, the refinement, whether you conch it or not, those sorts of things. High quality chocolate should not be super bitter. A lot of people don't like dark chocolate because they say it's synonymous with bitter. None of these are bitter. They might be a bit intense if you have a big sweet tooth, but they're not bitter. And they're not sour. Some might have a little bit of tartness to it, which helps, again, bring out those fruity notes. But it shouldn't feel too sour. But again, there's nothing wrong with a bit of tartness. Some people just don't like that. I remember a chocolatier who, not really into fine chocolate, but into making chocolates with you know, commercial chocolate, and their brain couldn't grasp tartness in a chocolate bar. It just didn't work for them, which I understand. You know, everyone has their own preferences. The Hacienda Nevera bar, they suggest things like, I think it was, some red fruits, because it's not on the bar here. I think the other one was coffee, soft nuts was another one in here. So I can see a bit of the nutty and the coffee. For me, again, the fruit is a bit limiting here. It's kind of there, like it shows itself up quickly and then it disappears, but it's definitely there. But it does have, compared to these two, less fruity, a bit more warmer tones with the earthy and the nutty, whereas these tones that are not fruity are more fragrant, like oak or cinnamon or something like that. Whereas this one, again, today I can't get out of my head raspberry yogurt, cherry yogurt, and that's what I'm tasting. So definitely the fruity notes, a lot of people get that. And again, some people will say citrus, cherry, plum, apricot. It doesn't matter on the specifics, especially if you're a beginner. You're all paralleling the same idea, so to speak. And so as you get more accustomed to tasting, as you think about your flavors more, you'll become more consistent with which words you articulate with which flavors you're tasting, okay? And that comes with time. So don't be so hard on yourself. There is no right answer. Get that out of your head. If you think that there's a right answer, there's not. That's not how flavor works. If you read the science on flavor, there's a lot of subjectivity involved. It doesn't mean that it's completely subjective. There are, if we took these in a lab and analyzed them, there would be specific molecules that are associated with specific floral notes, fruity notes, this and that. But in real time, there's a lot of differences between you and I as far as our tongues, our mouths, the taste buds, the olfactory receptors, those can differ between people. And then because flavors are perception built in the brain, we have different reference points. If you grew up in Southeast Asia versus in North America, you probably have a different repertoire of foods and smells and associations. And so you're going to pick different things. So a lot of people get frustrated because they say they don't taste what's on the back of the bar. That's not the goal. The suggestions, and a key word is suggestion here, on the back of the bar is, as a consumer, you look at the bar, 70% dark chocolate, but if it's a fine chocolate bar, well, what is it going to taste like? Okay, floral, fruity. Okay, I can kind of see that. I kind of like that. Maybe some people hate fruity notes in their chocolate, so they're going to avoid that if it says that on the wrapper. Maybe some of the bars have more baked fudge, woody notes. That's more appealing to some people. You'd be more likely to buy that bar. That's fine, but there's suggestions. Sometimes what I taste is completely nothing what the bar says. Sometimes I can see the parallels. Sometimes it's right on. So whether that's me or you, that doesn't matter. The point is, can you pick out all these interesting flavors in the fine chocolate, and do you enjoy it or not? That's what it comes down to. Just enjoy the chocolates. You're not a judge at a panel. And trust me, a lot of these judges at these award ceremonies are not as, what's the word I can use? They're not as seasoned as you might think. A lot of them, it could be their first time. Maybe they're a blog writer and somebody asked them to be a judge on a tasting panel. And that's all well and good. But don't think that everyone out there who's writing suggestions on labels or judging chocolates has years and years of experience as a sommelier. It's usually not the case. So don't put down what you're experiencing, And you'll see with time, if you try this Lacuna bar over and over again, if you try this Hacienda Vega bar over and over again, this week, next month, next year, you'll start to see consistencies between all tastings if you record it. And you'll see some things that kind of shift from tasting to tasting. And that could be the food you ate. It could be, again, the order that you had them and which chocolates you paired it with that day. So pay attention to patterns. Pay attention to consistencies. That's why it's very important to write down. And just be mindful in general. Be present. Really focus on that breathing. If there's anything for you to take away from today, from this video, is to really increase the mouth movement while you're enjoying it and exhale, exhale, exhale. A lot of people on my tastings, I see they exhale very politely, very quiet. No. Especially as a beginner, really breathe in deep, see your chest rise, and breathe out nice and strong. Really hear yourself breathe. The more you do that, the stronger you do that, especially as a beginner, especially when it's hard to articulate, the more aroma information you send your brain and the easier it'll be to pick out those flavors. The more flavor you'll get from your chocolate. So finally, I want to talk about how to wrap up. So once we're done tasting our chocolates, how do we keep them? How do we preserve them? I mean, these chocolate bars are expensive, $10, $12, $14 a bar sometimes. How do we preserve them? These are not bars that we're going to eat in one sitting, right? This is not really a serving of chocolate. This is multiple servings. We're just conditioned to think it's a serving. And especially with fine chocolate, like a fine wine or fine scotch, You want to enjoy a little bit, then put it away and have it again another day when you have time to really appreciate it. So the key is to not expose it to too much air. So the Cacao Suyo bar, it comes vacuum packed, which I really love. And once you open the bar, just make sure you take out as much air as possible and then roll it up and tape it and then put that back. Okay, so whatever bars you're opening up, make sure you seal them back in the wrapper, keep as much air out, tape it if you have to. The Cantu bar actually has a little bit of a sticky part on the wrapper, so you can just sort of pull it down to where the chocolate ends and then stick it back and it stays sort of intact, which is really nice. And then keep your chocolate somewhere cool, somewhere dry. You don't want a lot of humidity there, and obviously away from heat sources. You don't want it to melt. If it did melt, it's not the end of the world. You can still enjoy it. Keep it away from direct sunlight, keep it away from heat sources. Don't put it near an appliance that might get a little bit warm, even like a fridge, because it can bloom and melt. You want to keep them in the best way possible. Again, even if these did bloom or melt, they're not bad. I can still enjoy them, but I might have to enjoy them in melted form because the texture is not usually as nice when it's bloomed already. But keep them cool, keep them dry, and yes, you can refrigerate your chocolate. Whoever's telling you you can't, they don't really know what they're talking about, I'm sorry to say. But you can refrigerate chocolate. If you live somewhere warm, if you live somewhere where you don't have air conditioning, gets really hot in the summer, you don't want your chocolate to bloom. As long as it's sealed well, like I showed you, and you can even put these, once they're wrapped up again, put them in a container, an airtight container, and put them in the fridge. That's perfectly fine. I find that my chocolate bars, the flavor is more vibrant for longer if I do keep them in the fridge after they're open. I do find that. To it, a lot of people will just kind of wrap it up and put it in their cupboards, which might have other odors in there. Maybe you're cooking in the kitchen a lot and a lot of strong smells kind of seep into it and sort of get into the chocolate a little bit. So you want to keep it sort of in a vacuum per se. If you have a wine cooler, for instance, that's a nice place to put it as long as it's very low humidity. It's a good temperature where it's not too cold. Never put it in the freezer. I wouldn't suggest that. Ganaches you could freeze, but solid chocolate bars I wouldn't, and you don't really have to. The key though is if you do refrigerate your chocolate bars, let them acclimate before you open them up. Okay, so whether I put them in the fridge like this, which I don't really recommend because the fridges have a lot of odors, put them in another container. When you're ready to eat them again, take them out of the fridge and let them acclimate before you expose them to air. Otherwise, you're going to get condensation on your chocolate bars, just like you would on a glass of cold water on a hot day. And what's going to happen is the condensation is going to dissolve some of the sugars on the bar. You might get sugar bloom because after it dissolves, it'll dry out and you get this white haze on there. Sugar bloom is a bit different than fat bloom. And it might get a bit tacky. Again, you can still eat it, that's fine, but it's not going to be in the ideal state. So it's very important to keep them cool, keep them dry, keep them away from direct sunlight, keep them away from strong odors, and they'll be fine. And just remember too, if you are refrigerating it, make sure to let it acclimate before you open it up. That could be an hour, could be a few hours, could be pull it out the night before and have it the next day, something like that. And also you want to make sure that your chocolate is room temperature before you eat it to get the most flavor out of your chocolate. Some people like their chocolate cold. I know a few people that just love the hard cold chocolate. And that's fine, just be aware that the flavors might mute a little bit. It might not melt as nice in your mouth. But if you just want a piece and it's cold, you could just have a sip of hot water before you eat it, and that might help bring out the flavors a little bit more. So hopefully this has helped give you some better tools and tips on how to appreciate and taste your fine chocolates. And remember, it's not just about you. It's not just about the product of chocolate itself. It's what it's tied to. If you appreciate the flavors of these chocolates, the qualities and the skill of the makers, then if you share this information with others and they get into it as well, it basically sustains a lot of important features, right? So these cacaos are made from rare cacao. Very small percentage of the world, maybe 5-10% of the world's cacao is being considered fine cacao. And that's being replaced by a lot of commercial cacao. And a lot of farmers do replace their cacao, not because they sort of want to per se, but they need to make a living. And if fine cacao is a lot more work, a lot more effort, more susceptible to disease, and if people aren't paying them a premium for it, they're just going to switch over to crop that, helps sustain their livelihoods, right? But if there are makers out there seeking this high quality cacao, this rare cacao, and they're willing to pay the farmers the value of the cacao and the work put into it, and if there's consumers out there that appreciate that work, that flavor, then we have this wonderful system in place that sustains one another. And so if you're into fine chocolate, it's not just about enjoying really good tasting chocolate, which that's definitely a major feature of it, but you're sustaining the people who believe in that as well. You're encouraging the farmers to grow this fine cacao, to keep growing it, to sustain that biodiversity that is being depleted. It's being replaced in many places. And you're also sustaining the skill of these small scale entrepreneurs, these chocolate entrepreneurs who are putting passion and love and dedication into the craft of chocolate. And so if you want more food in your world that is made with, authentic, true ingredients, that is highly flavorful, that is made with quality in mind instead of other aspects in mind, then getting into fine chocolate, learning how to discern the differences between what really is fine and what just appears to be fine is very beneficial to you and to many, many people. You're sort of part of something if you are in it for the right reasons and if you appreciate it. And so I encourage you to check out my website, read as much as you like. I have a lot of research blogs and different blogs on there with information, a lot of free information that I'm happy to share with you. And also go to beantobarworld.com/suggestions. My suggestion box is a place where you can just put in feedback for me, things that you want me to talk about, whether it's in videos and blogs, research summaries you want me to summarize. There's so many things I need to do and I can do, and sometimes I just need a nudge from someone saying, I want this specifically, can you do it? And I'll be more likely to do it much sooner. And if you just want to talk about chocolate, I'm happy to talk to you. Feel free to contact me through my website and we can talk about chocolate. If you need some lessons and tutoring or you want to have a tasting, all that is available on there as well. So it was really a pleasure of mine to have this moment with you, to teach you about fine chocolate. I hope you learned a lot and I hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.